She had been working at the small restaurant for a few months now, learning the rhythm of the busy space like it was a second heartbeat. Every morning, she arrived before the sun even touched the city skyline, tying her apron tightly, adjusting the tray straps over her shoulders, and taking a deep breath before stepping into the constant hum of chatter, clinking dishes, and the smell of fresh coffee. She liked the smell. It made her feel grounded even when life outside the restaurant felt uncertain. Her days were long and her energy often drained by the time she returned home. She balanced more than one job just to make ends meet, and most nights she found herself lying on a narrow bed, thinking about bills, rent, and the small dreams she held close. Music was one of those dreams. She had learned to play the piano by ear when she was a child, using an old out-of-tune keyboard that had belonged to her family. Back then, music had been a way to escape, to speak when words felt clumsy or heavy. She carried that quiet love for music through the years, even though she rarely found a moment to touch the keys now. At work, she moved with a practiced efficiency, balancing trays, pouring coffee, and remembering orders without needing to glance at the notes scribbled on paper. Most people only saw her as a waitress, one of the many faces flitting around tables, clearing plates or bringing smiles when she could. Few noticed the way she hummed softly while working, a tune that lingered in the air like a secret only she knew. The hum was often unnoticed, but sometimes, when a customer glanced her way, they would smile at the faint melody and the gentle energy she brought with her. It was a Wednesday morning, and the restaurant was unusually busy. A group of important-looking men and women had arrived early, discussing papers and numbers in low voices that carried a tension she could feel from across the room. She had been told they were executives from a big company, meeting to finalize a deal that could change their business entirely. The tables were set meticulously, the silverware polished, and the waitstaff moved with extra care, as if knowing that every small action could matter in the presence of such influential people. She was assigned to the section closest to the group. She tried to remain invisible, moving quietly, clearing plates, refilling water glasses, and making sure that nothing disturbed their conversation. Her heart beat a little faster than usual. She was careful not to spill anything or make a noise that might distract them. Every time she approached, she made sure to bow her head slightly, smile politely, and step back with careful grace. It felt like walking a tightrope, where even the smallest misstep could draw unwelcome attention. Despite her careful movements, she couldn't help but overhear snippets of their conversation. Words like investment, million-dollar deal, and contract floated over from their table. Her curiosity tugged at her, but she pushed it down, reminding herself to stay professional. Still, part of her imagined what it would feel like to be involved in something so significant. She had dreams of her own, not of corporate deals, but of being recognized for her music, of touching people with something that came straight from her heart. For now, she would focus on keeping her section clean and her steps silent. As she cleared the table, she noticed something unusual. One of the executives glanced at the corner of the room where an upright piano sat, tucked quietly against the wall. It was a small, modest piano, a little worn at the edges, but still capable of producing a sound that could fill a room. She had seen it before during slower shifts, but it had never been used while customers were eating. Her fingers itched, remembering the feel of keys under her touch, the way music could flow naturally, almost as if it had its own life. She shook the thought away. It wasn't her place, she reminded herself. She was a waitress, not a performer, and these were people with serious business to handle. The group of executives was getting more tense as the conversation continued. One of them sighed, pushing papers aside and muttering something about needing a break or a change in the atmosphere. She noticed the subtle ways the others shifted in their seats, leaning back, rubbing their temples, or glancing out the window as if wishing they could escape the pressure for just a moment. The air was heavy, almost thick, and she realized that the energy in the room could affect the outcome of whatever deal they were working on. She felt a small tug of responsibility, even though it was not her role to influence business matters. Her mind wandered for a moment, thinking about the piano again. She had spent countless hours alone, playing and experimenting, letting music carry her through difficult times. She knew she could play something that might lift the mood, something gentle that could ease the tension without being intrusive. The idea was impulsive, almost reckless, but it stayed with her, growing stronger as she continued her rounds. She wondered what would happen if she just played a little softly, so no one could be upset, but maybe everyone could feel a little lighter. At first, she dismissed the thought entirely. She was just the person who cleared tables, the one who made sure drinks were filled and plates were cleared. But the more she watched the executives, the more she noticed their subtle discomfort, the furrowed brows and restless hands. Something inside her whispered that maybe this small act could help. She imagined herself sitting at the piano, letting her fingers move without overthinking and seeing the room's energy shift, even slightly. It felt like a risk, but one that could be worth taking. The restaurant manager walked by, giving instructions to another waiter, and she realized she could ask permission, just a quick question before taking any action. She approached him, her heart racing. "Excuse me," she said softly, "the piano is free right now. Do you think I could play something for a moment? Just to maybe lighten the mood?" The manager looked at her surprised. He was used to following the rules strictly, and this was clearly unusual. "The executives?" he asked, eyebrows raised. "Are you sure?" She nodded. "Just a little, soft. I promise I won't disturb anything. I think it could help." He hesitated, glancing toward the group, noticing their tense expressions. After a moment, he shrugged and smiled faintly. "All right, just keep it soft and professional. Let's see what happens." Her pulse quickened. She moved toward the piano, pulling the bench out carefully, and sat down. The keys were cool under her fingers, familiar yet distant from her memory. She took a deep breath and pressed a single note. Then another. The sound was soft, tentative, but enough to catch the attention of the executives. She didn't rush. She let the music flow slowly, easing her own nerves while filling the room with a gentle, warm melody. She didn't play anything complicated, nothing formal, just an improvisation guided by feeling. The tune was simple, quiet, but it had a life of its own. She could see the executives glance up, some smiling faintly, some leaning back in their chairs. The air changed imperceptibly. The tension began to melt just a little. She played carefully, listening to the subtle responses around her, adjusting her rhythm, slowing down when conversations paused, speeding up when laughter followed a light comment. For the first time that day, she felt seen, not as a waitress, not as a helper in the background, but as someone capable of creating a moment that mattered. She wasn't sure if anyone fully understood it yet, but she felt the shift in the room and the quiet thrill of knowing that something she loved could make a difference. Even here, even now. The executives, still absorbed in their discussion, now had a rhythm to follow, a gentle background that seemed to ease the weight of their decisions. She played on, unaware of what would come next, only focused on the music, the soft rise and fall of notes and the strange, comforting thought that maybe, just maybe, she had done the right thing. The gentle notes of her improvised melody began to drift across the room like a soft breeze. At first, it was subtle, almost easy to ignore if someone was too focused on papers and contracts, but soon, the atmosphere began to shift. The executives paused mid-sentence, eyebrows furrowing less tightly, hands stopping their restless tapping on the table. A few exchanged glances, and almost imperceptibly, tension in the room eased. She noticed the change immediately. Her fingers hovered over the keys for a moment, letting the room adjust to the sound before continuing. She didn't want to rush, didn't want to draw attention to herself. She simply wanted to create a small bubble of calm in the middle of their storm of numbers and deadlines. The more she played, the more her confidence grew. Each note was a conversation without words, a quiet bridge between her and the people around her. One of the executives, a tall man with a serious face, leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes briefly, as if the music gave him a small moment of relief from the weight of responsibility. Another executive, a woman in a tailored suit, tapped her fingers lightly against the table in rhythm with the melody. She smiled faintly, a softness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. The shift was subtle, but it was real. The room was no longer filled with stress. It was filled with possibility. As she continued, she allowed herself to experiment. She added a few gentle variations, weaving in small flourishes she had learned from years of practice, letting the music breathe and flow naturally. She watched carefully, observing how each note affected the people around her. Some leaned forward slightly, listening more intently. Others exchanged quiet murmurs with their colleagues, a hint of laughter slipping into the conversation. She realized her music was no longer just filling the room, it was shaping it. Her heart raced with excitement and nervousness at the same time. She had never imagined herself in this position, playing music for strangers, especially ones involved in something so important. Yet the thought of helping, of creating a calm space where people could think and connect, pushed her forward. She could feel the energy of the room responding to her, and it filled her with a quiet pride that she had not felt in years. One of the executives, noticing the change, glanced toward the manager. "Is this live music?" he asked, his tone curious but not dismissive. The manager hesitated, glancing at her with a mixture of surprise and caution. "Yes," he replied softly. "She offered to play. It seems to be helping." The executive's expression softened. He nodded slowly, as if recognizing that sometimes small, unexpected things could make a big difference. The other executives looked up as well, intrigued by the gentle sound filling the space. No one asked her to stop. In fact, there was an unspoken agreement that she should continue. Her presence and her music became part of the room's rhythm, subtle but undeniable. She played on, letting her instincts guide her. She remembered moments from her childhood, afternoons spent at the old worn piano in her home, teaching herself to feel the music instead of overthinking it. She drew from that experience now, letting her emotions inform each note. Soft chords for moments when conversation paused, playful trills when laughter bubbled up, and gentle flowing patterns when the discussion grew tense again. It was improvisation, but it was purposeful. The executives responded naturally. The deal they had been struggling to finalize became easier to discuss. Words flowed more freely, ideas moved between them with less resistance. A difficult negotiation that had begun in stress and formality now carried a rhythm of understanding. She could feel it as clearly as the vibration of the keys beneath her fingers. Music had opened a doorway that words alone could not. One executive, who had been frowning almost constantly, now leaned forward, hands clasped, nodding slowly at what another was saying. Another smiled, a small, genuine smile that reached her eyes. The woman in the suit whispered something to her colleague, who laughed quietly, shaking his head. It was a small shift, but a shift nonetheless. She realized that her music was doing what she had hoped. It was bringing a sense of humanity into a room dominated by contracts and numbers. Her focus was intense, almost meditative. She barely noticed the other waitstaff moving around her, clearing plates and refilling drinks. She didn't notice the customers in the background glancing curiously at the piano. All that mattered was the music, the room, and the subtle but profound way her presence was changing the mood. It was exhilarating and terrifying at the same time. She had never played for such an audience before, yet she felt an unusual sense of belonging. She allowed herself a brief thought about how strange life could be. Just hours earlier, she had been moving from table to table, clearing dishes barely noticed by anyone. Now she was creating a moment that mattered, in a way she had never imagined. It was an unexpected stage, an impromptu performance with real consequences. She didn't think about fame or recognition. She only thought about the impact of her music, about the small difference she could make in that moment. Time seemed to stretch as she continued. The executives were now engaged in conversation, their words flowing more naturally, their laughter mingling with the soft chords she played. She felt a quiet thrill at the connection forming between her music and their dialogue. She realized that the power of her improvisation wasn't in technique or perfection. It was in authenticity, in playing from the heart, in allowing herself to respond to the energy in the room. One of the younger executives, who had been silent most of the meeting, now spoke up, smiling as he gestured toward his colleagues. The discussion turned collaborative rather than confrontational. Each idea met with curiosity instead of tension. She noticed that even subtle cues like a nod or a pause seemed to harmonize with her playing. The music and the conversation were intertwined, almost like they had been designed to complement each other. Her nerves began to calm. She realized that her improvisation was not only helping the executives, it was helping her too. She felt a deep sense of purpose, a reminder of why she loved music in the first place. It was not about applause or recognition. It was about connection, about creating moments where people could feel something beyond the immediate pressures of life. And in this room with these strangers, she was doing exactly that. She played on, her fingers moving almost automatically over the keys, guided by intuition and emotion. She noticed the executives now making eye contact, their voices softening, their expressions more open. Ideas were flowing more smoothly. and even when disagreements arose, they were handled with patience and understanding. She realized that the simple act of music had shifted not only the mood, but the way people were interacting. It was then that a subtle realization hit her. She was part of something bigger than herself. Her music had become a bridge between people, a tool for easing tension and opening hearts. She felt a quiet pride but also humility, recognizing that sometimes the most ordinary moments, like sitting at a piano in a restaurant, could carry extraordinary potential. The manager, watching from a distance, seemed both amazed and relieved. He had never seen anything like this happen before. A waitress playing spontaneously, creating an atmosphere that positively influenced a high-stakes business discussion. He shook his head slightly, smiling to himself. The executives, now fully engaged in the conversation, didn't notice her looking up from time to time, gauging their reactions. Their focus had shifted, but their energy was lighter, more open. She realized she had found a rhythm, a balance between playing and observing, between influencing and letting the music flow naturally. It was a delicate dance, but one she felt ready to perform. As she played, she thought about her life, about the challenges she faced every day, and about the small moments of courage that could make a difference. This had started as a simple impulse, a quiet hope to ease tension, but it was becoming so much more. She realized that her talent, her instinct, and her willingness to take a small risk were all converging in this one room, creating an effect that felt almost magical. By the time she looked up, she saw subtle smiles, relaxed postures, and nods of agreement among the executives. The atmosphere had shifted completely from the tense, formal beginning of the meeting. She felt a quiet sense of accomplishment and relief. Her improvisation had worked, in ways she hadn't dared to imagine when she first decided to sit at the piano. And yet, even as she allowed herself a small smile, she knew the story was not over. The room was still filled with potential, with decisions to be made and with energy that could either be lost or carried forward. She continued to play, each note a gentle guide, a quiet encouragement and a bridge between the tension of the business world and the human connection that could make all the difference. She kept her hands on the keys, letting the music flow naturally, almost as if it had a life of its own. The rhythm was soft at first, a gentle undercurrent, but slowly she allowed it to grow more expressive, moving with the conversation in the room. She could see the executives leaning in, their attention less on the papers before them and more on the feeling in the room. She didn't know exactly what was happening with the deal, but she could feel it changing, shifting, becoming something more collaborative, more human. Her fingers moved with confidence now, each note carefully placed to balance calm with energy, tension with release. The tallest executive, who had been stern and quiet earlier, now tapped his foot lightly under the table, a subtle sign that the music was reaching him. Another executive, a woman with sharp eyes, let out a small surprised laugh at a joke from her colleague. The melody seemed to breathe with the room, responding to each subtle movement, each whispered word. It was in that moment she realized something incredible. Music wasn't just background. It was part of the conversation. It was influencing the mood, creating an invisible connection between people who might otherwise remain distant, focused only on contracts and numbers. She adjusted the tempo, adding small improvisations, a rising chord here, a soft trill there, letting the melody guide the energy rather than trying to control it. She noticed a man at the head of the table frowning slightly, as though weighing a difficult decision. Without thinking, she softened her touch, letting the keys speak in warmth and reassurance. His frown eased just a little. Another executive leaned forward, resting an elbow on the table, nodding as he listened. She could sense that the tension, which had been tight and suffocating, was beginning to unravel, replaced by a subtle sense of ease and clarity. The music continued to flow, and she felt her own nerves melting away. It was no longer just an experiment or a spontaneous act, it was real. Her ability to improvise in the moment, to respond to the room and the people in it, was shaping how the conversation unfolded. It was as if the room had become a living organism, and her music was the pulse that kept it moving in harmony. The executives were now more relaxed, more open to listening and sharing ideas. Their voices no longer carried the sharp edge of stress, but were softer, more thoughtful. One executive, who had been silent for most of the meeting, began speaking, offering a suggestion. Another responded with a smile, acknowledging the idea. The dialogue had changed completely, subtle but powerful, all under the influence of the quiet, constant flow of her music. She paused briefly to take a breath, glancing around the room. The other waitstaff moved silently, giving her space, their own tasks momentarily secondary to the unexpected performance. The manager leaned against the wall, watching in amazement as the young waitress transformed the energy of the room without a single word. The piano, once just a piece of furniture in the corner, had become a catalyst, and she was the one breathing life into it. She could feel the subtle shifts in body language, the small changes in tone, the way the conversation was becoming less about winning and more about collaborating. The executives were starting to listen to one another in a way they hadn't before. Ideas flowed more freely, and even disagreements were handled with patience. She realized that her music had created a safe space, a bubble of calm where negotiation could happen without fear or tension. Her own heart was racing, but not from fear. This was excitement, the kind that came from knowing that something meaningful was happening, that her small act of courage and creativity was having a real impact. She let herself smile faintly, fingers moving over the keys with precision and care. She didn't need applause or acknowledgement. The response of the room was enough. The executives didn't even know her name, but they were experiencing the effect of her presence and her music. She began experimenting with a slightly livelier rhythm, sensing that the executives were becoming more engaged. The energy in the room lifted, laughter became more frequent, and the previous air of formality began to soften. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but she could feel it in the vibrations of the notes beneath her fingers, in the way the air seemed lighter, in the relaxed posture of the people around her. One executive, who had been skeptical at first, now leaned forward with a thoughtful expression, listening intently. Another executive whispered something to a colleague, smiling, and the sound of the piano seemed to encourage openness and collaboration. She realized that she had created a bridge between the seriousness of business and the humanity of people, a space where communication could thrive naturally. She continued, her improvisation now more confident, more responsive. She could sense when the executives were getting tired or tense, and she would slow down, soften the chords, let the music breathe. When they laughed or smiled, she would brighten the melody, weaving lightness into the room without overstepping or drawing attention to herself. It was a delicate balance, but she had discovered it intuitively, responding to the subtle cues around her. The manager, still watching, shook his head in disbelief. He had never seen such an effect from a spontaneous performance. Usually music in the restaurant was background, unnoticed, but this was different. It was transformative. The waitress, who had only meant to ease tension for a moment, had become the unseen force guiding a high-stakes meeting, and no one could ignore the difference it was making. She glanced at the group again, noticing that even the most serious executives were beginning to lean toward each other, nodding, smiling, and exchanging ideas with openness. The deal they were working on was moving forward, not because of pressure or negotiation tactics, but because the atmosphere had shifted. They were thinking more clearly, listening more attentively, and responding more empathetically, all under the subtle influence of her music. Her own awareness of what she was doing became more profound. She was not just playing notes. She was creating a mood, a rhythm, a current that carried people toward clarity and understanding. She thought about the years she had spent practicing alone, teaching herself to feel music instead of just playing it mechanically. None of those hours had felt wasted. This was the moment where all of it mattered. As the conversation continued, she noticed one executive leaning back, closing his eyes briefly, a small smile on his lips. He seemed lighter, less burdened by the weight of the decision before him. Another executive laughed softly at a comment, relaxing her posture. The change was undeniable, even if subtle. The room had become more than a place of business. It had become a space of connection, of collaboration. And it was happening because of the unexpected courage of a young waitress who dared to play. She let herself enjoy the moment quietly, her hands dancing over the keys with purpose and grace. She wasn't thinking about recognition or fame or anything beyond the immediate effect of her music. Each note was a choice, each chord a gentle influence on the energy of the room. It was a delicate art, a quiet power, and she was discovering it in real time. The executives, now fully engaged in their discussion, seemed unaware of the subtle guidance her music provided. Yet it was shaping the meeting in profound ways. Words flowed with more ease, ideas were considered with more thoughtfulness, and even disagreements were handled with calm and patience. The entire tone of the negotiation had shifted, and she could feel it in every vibration under her fingers. Her confidence grew with every chord. She realized that her music had become an unspoken language, connecting people who otherwise might have remained locked in tension and formality. She had created a bridge between seriousness and humanity, between pressure and calm, and it was working in ways she could not have predicted. Even as she played, she thought about how small actions could create significant change. She had only intended to play softly, to offer a moment of relief, but her presence and her improvisation were now guiding the room. It was a humbling and exhilarating experience, one that reminded her why she loved music so deeply. It was not about performance, not about applause, it was about connection, about creating a space where people could feel more human, even in the midst of pressure. She continued playing, aware that the meeting was progressing differently than it had at the beginning. The executives were leaning in, nodding, laughing, and sharing ideas more freely. The tension that had filled the room earlier had given way to something more collaborative, more creative, and more productive. Her music had done more than fill the silence. It had shaped the dialogue, influenced the energy, and created an environment where success seemed more attainable. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine what might happen if her music could continue to influence people in this way. She smiled faintly to herself, knowing that this was only one meeting, one moment, but it felt like proof that small acts of courage and creativity could have an outsized impact. And in that room, with the soft sound of piano guiding the discussion, she felt a quiet sense of triumph, not for herself, but for the power of music to touch hearts and minds in unexpected ways. The piano's soft notes continued to fill the room, winding around the conversation like a gentle current. She had long ago stopped thinking of herself as just a waitress. In this moment, she was a quiet guide, shaping the room's energy with every chord. The executives were no longer tense, their earlier stiffness replaced by a rhythm of collaboration and curiosity. She could feel it in the way they leaned toward each other, the way they listened, the way their hands moved in tandem with her music. One executive, the tallest man who had barely spoken before, now seemed fully engaged. He was smiling faintly, nodding as he discussed a critical point, and when he glanced at the piano, she simply returned a soft smile and continued playing. She had learned to let the music respond to the room, not the other way around. Every hesitation, every pause in conversation, she filled with gentle, flowing melodies that seemed to calm even the most rigid thoughts. Suddenly, a tense moment arrived. Two executives disagreed sharply over an aspect of the contract, voices rising just enough to cut through the soft piano. She froze for a split second, then instinctively shifted the music, letting it rise with confidence yet remain warm and inviting. Her fingers flew over the keys, creating a bridge between tension and understanding. The volume was subtle, but it carried presence. Slowly, the argument softened, their voices lowering as if the room itself had reminded them to listen. It was remarkable to her how much influence something as simple as music could have. She had always known it could touch emotions, but to see it change the flow of conversation in real time, to turn disagreement into dialogue, was almost unbelievable. She felt her heart beat faster, not from nerves but from awe at what was happening. She was shaping the outcome without words, simply by being present and following the instincts of her fingers on the keys. The woman in the sharp suit spoke next, offering a compromise with a quiet smile. The others listened, nodding slowly, and the discussion continued, calmer and more focused. She noticed small details, a laugh shared over a minor joke, a hand on a shoulder to emphasize a point, eyes meeting with mutual understanding. All of these subtle gestures were now possible because the tension had dissolved. The room had become collaborative, creative, alive, and it was all unfolding in response to her improvisation. She allowed herself a quiet moment of gratitude. Years of learning music alone, of playing in quiet rooms when no one was listening, had prepared her for this. Each hour spent practicing, each note memorized by heart, had led to this unexpected moment. She was not performing for applause or recognition. She was performing to create connection, to influence in the gentlest way possible, and it was working. The executives were now laughing together, exchanging ideas that had seemed impossible earlier. One of the younger executives, who had barely spoken, now contributed actively, and the responses he received were thoughtful and respectful. It struck her that this atmosphere, this sense of trust and openness, had been almost impossible at the beginning of the meeting. The room had transformed entirely. Her hands moved instinctively over the keys, each note chosen to support the current mood. She added a few gentle arpeggios, letting the melody rise and fall like a wave, guiding the room's energy. The tallest executive leaned back, eyes closed briefly, listening intently. Another executive smiled, a soft chuckle escaping as she responded to a comment from a colleague. Even the most skeptical participants now seemed engaged, their eyes brighter, their bodies more relaxed. It was in that moment that the most critical part of the deal came up, a clause that could make or break the entire agreement. Tension spiked again, subtle but noticeable, and the executives' voices grew sharper, more insistent. She felt it immediately. She didn't hesitate. Her fingers moved faster, more assuredly, creating a melody that was strong yet soothing, assertive yet inviting. She wasn't just filling silence now. She was guiding the energy in a direction where compromise and clarity were possible. One of the executives looked directly at her, a faint smile of surprise on his face. He didn't speak, but his eyes reflected recognition, an understanding that her music was helping them navigate a difficult moment. She didn't stop. She couldn't. She let the music carry the conversation, letting it breathe, letting it shift naturally. She had learned over the years to trust her instincts, and now, in this room, they were saving more than just a moment. They were saving $1 million deal. The argument softened, and voices dropped. The executive who had been the most insistent paused, taking a breath, and then offered a small concession. The others nodded, and a sense of agreement began to settle over the table. The atmosphere was no longer tense. It was collaborative, energized, and optimistic. She could feel the relief in the room as strongly as she could feel the vibrations under her fingers. Her music had made this possible. The manager, watching from a distance, could hardly believe what he was seeing. He had never imagined that a spontaneous performance could have such a tangible effect on a high-stakes business negotiation. His eyes flicked between the executives and the waitress, a mixture of astonishment and quiet pride in what was unfolding before him. He had given her permission to play on a whim, never expecting that her music would become the invisible force guiding the meeting toward success. The room continued to respond to her improvisation. Laughter and light conversation replaced the tension that had dominated earlier. Ideas flowed freely, and even difficult points of discussion were now approached with patience and mutual understanding. She realized that her music had not just eased tension, it had shaped the way people thought and acted, creating an environment where cooperation and creativity could flourish. One of the executives, who had seemed the hardest to please, leaned forward and spoke with enthusiasm, building on a suggestion from a colleague. The room responded instantly with nods, smiles, and gentle laughter. Every interaction now carried a sense of harmony, and she felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that she had contributed to this transformation. She was not part of the business world, but her presence and her music had become essential to the outcome. She allowed herself a brief glance around the room, taking in the subtle changes. The executives were relaxed, focused, and fully engaged. The energy had shifted completely from the early tension, and she realized that her improvisation had created a space where success was not just possible, it was inevitable. Every chord, every note, every subtle rise and fall of the melody had guided the room to this moment. Her fingers moved with confidence, weaving light and warmth into every chord. She noticed the executives exchanging quiet smiles, nodding as they reached agreements and even laughing softly at jokes. She had always known that music could influence emotions, but to see it shape decisions in real time, in such a high-stakes environment, was extraordinary. She felt a deep sense of fulfillment and purpose, recognizing that her small act of courage had created a profound impact. As the final points of the deal were discussed, she let the music slow slightly, softening and stretching each note, allowing the room to settle into calm focus. The executives were listening to each other, weighing ideas thoughtfully and responding with empathy. The energy was balanced, collaborative, and productive. She felt a quiet pride, knowing that her improvisation had helped guide this moment to a successful resolution. Finally, the executives reached consensus. The tension was gone, replaced by smiles, handshakes, and a sense of relief. The deal was finalized, and she could see the gratitude in their eyes even if they didn't fully understand why the meeting had flowed so smoothly. She smiled quietly to herself, allowing the soft melody to linger in the room as the formalities concluded. Her music had not only eased the negotiation, it had shaped it, guiding everyone toward agreement without a single word spoken directly to influence the outcome. The manager approached her as the executives gathered their belongings, shaking his head in disbelief. "I don't know how to thank you," he said quietly. You saved the day." She shrugged modestly, smiling, knowing that it had not been about recognition. She had only followed her instincts and trusted her music. As the executives left, still murmuring appreciatively to each other, she realized that her life had changed in that single moment. She had discovered the true power of her talent, the ability to influence, to connect, and to create harmony in unexpected places. What had begun as a simple act of improvisation had become something far greater, something she would never forget. For the first time in a long while, she felt seen, not just as a waitress or a helper, but as someone capable of making a real difference. The room was quiet now, the echo of the piano lingering softly. She took a deep breath, allowing herself to absorb the enormity of what had happened. Her improvisation had turned a tense, high-stakes meeting into a success story. Her courage, creativity, and willingness to take a small risk had changed lives, if only for that moment. She sat there for a moment longer, letting the last notes fade, reflecting on how unpredictably life could reward those who dared to act. She had not known the outcome when she first approached the piano. She had only followed her instincts, trusted her abilities, and let her heart guide her hands. And now the result was undeniable. $1 million deal had been secured, and her music had played a central role. The room was quiet now, filled only with the soft hum of the air conditioner and the faint scent of coffee lingering from the lunch. She sat back from the piano, letting her fingers hover over the last note before lifting them completely. The meeting had ended, and the executives had left with smiles, handshakes, and a sense of relief that had not been there when they arrived. She felt a strange mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. Her hands tingled from the effort, and yet her heart was light, full of something she had not felt in a long time. Recognition, though unspoken, of the impact she had made. The manager approached her cautiously, as if he were not sure whether to congratulate her or simply admire in silence. "I still can't believe it," he said, shaking his head with a quiet laugh. You actually helped secure that deal. I've never seen anything like this happen before in all my years." She shrugged, smiling faintly, feeling the familiar modesty that always accompanied her achievements. "I just played," she said softly. "I thought it might help." He shook his head again, smiling wider now. "You did more than help. You changed everything in that room. You created the right energy at the right time. That's not just playing, you saved $1 million deal." She blinked, processing his words. It sounded unbelievable, almost like a story from someone else's life. Yet she could feel it in the subtle shift she had observed in the room, the way the executives had laughed, nodded, and collaborated. Somehow her music had done exactly what she had hoped it might. As the day continued, word of what had happened spread quietly among the restaurant staff. A few of the waiters and cooks stopped by to smile at her or whisper congratulations. No one seemed to want to break the professional decorum, but the awe in their eyes was unmistakable. She had always felt like just another face in the busy rhythm of the restaurant, another worker carrying trays and wiping tables. Now she felt different. She felt seen, not for her job title, but for the talent she had nurtured quietly for years. Later that evening, as the restaurant settled into its usual calm after the lunch rush, a small group of customers lingered, curious about the piano she had played. A man who had overheard part of the story approached, smiling politely. "I heard someone say a waitress played during an important meeting today. Is that true?" She nodded, laughing quietly. "Yes," she said softly. "I just improvised a little. I didn't think it would matter much." He shook his head, his eyes wide with appreciation. "Matter? It matters more than you know." That music made a difference today. She felt warmth spread through her chest. For so long she had believed that her music existed only for herself, a private joy. But now she could see, in small but meaningful ways, that it could reach people, influence them, and even change outcomes. The following days brought an unexpected flurry of attention. One of the executives had mentioned her improvisation to a colleague outside the company. Soon, the restaurant began receiving calls from people curious about the pianist who had helped secure a major deal. Some wanted to hire her for private events. Others asked if she gave lessons. She had never imagined her music being in demand, and yet here it was, opening doors she had never dared to knock on before. She spent that evening reflecting on how quickly life could change. Only a few days ago, she had been quietly moving from table to table, unnoticed, her dreams tucked away. Now she had a glimpse of possibility she had not thought possible. Her music had opened a door, and the world beyond it seemed full of opportunities. It was a strange feeling, both exciting and terrifying. But she realized something important. It had not been about ambition or fame. It had been about courage, about trusting herself, and about being willing to act even when the outcome was uncertain. The manager, who had been quietly supportive throughout, finally spoke more seriously. "I think you should consider taking this further," he said, leaning against the counter. "You have something rare, something that changes people. Don't let it stay hidden behind tables and trays." She nodded slowly, thinking about it. For years she had played for herself, a private joy. She had never considered that her music could become more than that. But now, she understood that small acts of courage could ripple outward in ways that no one could predict. In the following weeks, she began to receive opportunities she had never imagined. A local music school offered her a chance to teach students, recognizing her talent and her ability to connect with people through music. A small event company asked if she could play at a corporate gathering, intrigued by the story of her improvisation. Even the restaurant's regular customers began asking to hear her play during quieter evenings. Her life was changing, not because she sought it, but because she had acted on instinct and followed her passion. She often thought back to that day, sitting at the piano while the executives argued and negotiated. The room had been tense, heavy with responsibility and expectation, and yet she had trusted herself enough to play. Each note had mattered, each pause, each variation had shaped the energy in the room. It was more than music. It was influence, connection, and courage all rolled into one. She realized that sometimes the most ordinary moments, the moments where no one notices you, could lead to extraordinary outcomes. Her friends noticed the change in her too. She moved with a quiet confidence, a subtle pride that was not boastful but grounded in experience. They asked about the story, and she told it simply, without exaggeration, focusing on the way music had brought calm and clarity to a tense situation. They were amazed, as she had been, at how one small act could have such far-reaching effects. Even the executives reached out in small ways. A thank you note, a brief phone call, and eventually an invitation to play at a corporate event. Each acknowledgement reminded her that her improvisation had not gone unnoticed, that her courage and talent had been recognized, and that her actions had lasting value. She felt a sense of fulfillment that she had never known, a quiet joy in realizing that her passion could impact others in such profound ways. As she continued to play, both at the restaurant and in new opportunities, she reflected on the lesson she had learned. Talent alone was not enough. Courage, timing, and willingness to act mattered just as much. She had no way of knowing that her decision to play that day would save $1 million deal, but she had acted anyway, trusting her instincts and letting her abilities guide her. That trust had created a ripple effect, changing not only the outcome of a business meeting but also the trajectory of her own life. Her life slowly began to shift. Teaching music, performing at small events, and sharing her story with others became a part of her daily routine. Each time she played, she remembered that day in the restaurant, the way her music had calmed tension and fostered connection. It became a guiding principle that every act, no matter how small it seems, carries potential for impact. And sometimes the smallest gestures, played softly on a piano, offered without expectation, could change lives. She also noticed how others began to see her differently. Customers, colleagues, and friends all treated her with a newfound respect, recognizing not only her skill but the courage behind it. It was humbling and inspiring, a reminder that when someone follows their heart and acts with integrity, recognition often comes in unexpected forms. She understood that her story was not just about a single performance, but about the power of presence, empathy, and authenticity. Over time, the story of her improvised piano performance became a quiet legend at the restaurant. New staff heard about it, and longtime customers recounted the tale with admiration. She didn't take pride in the fame it brought her, but she took pride in knowing that a simple act, guided by intuition and courage, had created a lasting positive impact. It reminded her every day of the potential within ordinary moments to create extraordinary results. In the evenings, when the restaurant was quiet and the piano sat waiting in the corner, she would sometimes play softly for herself, remembering that first improvisation. Each note carried memory, gratitude, and the understanding that her music had power beyond entertainment. It could heal, connect, influence, and inspire. That day had been a turning point, and she carried its lessons forward in every performance, in every interaction, and in the quiet confidence that came from trusting her instincts and following her heart. The story concluded with a sense of calm triumph. She had begun as an unnoticed waitress, moving silently through the restaurant unnoticed by the world. Through courage, creativity, and a simple act of music, she had transformed a tense situation into success, influenced a high-stakes business deal, and changed the course of her own life. Her improvisation had proven that talent combined with heart and action could ripple outward in ways no one could predict. And so she continued, quietly, humbly, yet with an awareness of the power she carried. Each day she moved through her life with care, knowing that the small choices, when made with courage and authenticity, could create moments of unexpected magic. The piano in the corner remained a symbol of possibility, a reminder that sometimes the world listens most when we dare to act from our hearts, even when no one is watching.